Today we are going to tell you about the legendary Chevrolet Corvair car, which was produced from 1960 to 1969. This model was created in response to the popular West German Volkswagen Beetle and had many innovative solutions. In the early 1960s, Harvard University was a hotbed of student activism, where locals eagerly absorbed new ideas. Students dreamed of world peace, hotly debated the mystery of President Kennedy's assassination, and created a breeding ground for future rebels, secret agents, and left-wing terrorists. It was here, at Harvard Law School, that an American of Arab descent named Ralph Nader began his career, which at the time did not attract much attention from the general public. In 1964, when Nader was already 34 years old, he moved to Washington, where 5 years later, he buried one of the most original models ever created by General Motors, the Chevrolet Corvair. This car appeared in 1959 in response to the West German Volkswagen Beetle, which by that time was enjoying tremendous success, especially among students. Many of Nader's friends who owned Beetles immediately switched to the Corvair, which was more spacious, had a 6-cylinder engine with an interesting design, and did not resemble the Astro's keel and the proven heavyweights that caused constant parking problems in cramped university towns. Like the Volkswagen Beetle, the Corvair had a rear-mounted opposed engine with an aluminum, not cast iron, block, independent wheel suspension, a very progressive front spring suspension on transverse levers that rested on an impressive beam, and a similar design for the rear suspension on slanted levers. The Corvair was renowned for its easy handling, as the advertising slogan claimed, for girls who thought they hated city driving. Charles Kane, vice president of General Motors for Development, was strongly opposed to the launch of the Corvair into production from the very beginning, as the car was too atypical for the corporation's model range and, due to the designer's lack of experience, caused problems even during testing. However, the management of General Motors at that time was not particularly meticulous, and the Corvair fit the main principle: maximum profit at minimum cost. This was much more important than all other arguments. John Delore, head of the Pontiac division, recalled that administrators who rose to the top and were individually decent and reasonable people easily made irresponsible and questionable decisions. It was they who approved the Corvair for production, despite the fact that the model had pronounced oversteer, which naive students mistook for easy handling. On the prestigious 14th floor of General Motors headquarters, they had no idea how much effort it took for Porsche engineers to learn to drive their popular sports car, as the rear engine layout initially concealed problems. On turns, the engine worked like a pendulum, trying to turn the car around the rear wheels, and the body, leaning on the too soft independent suspension, squeezed the wheels under itself, causing the car to flip over. This is exactly what happened to Frank Williams, a Chevrolet design engineer, while testing the Corvair on the Milford, Michigan, test track. Members of the management's families had the right to test the new car, which was already on sale. By a cruel irony, the first victim of the model was the son of the general manager of the Cadillac division, the son of the executive vice president of General Motors, and the niece of the Chevrolet manager. The question of strengthening the Corvair's safety, particularly the rear suspension, became obvious. A stabilizer bar was needed, which cost only $15. Nevertheless, the 14th floor rejected the innovation, and only after the threat of the Chevrolet division manager to clean up the mess did they reconsider their decision. The stabilizer bar appeared on the model in 1964, but it was already too late. Ralph Nader arrived in Washington, who was well-versed in cars, especially the fact that the Volkswagen Beetle and the Corvair had their trunks in the front. He became a consultant to Democratic Senator Abraham Ribicoff, who called for tougher penalties for speeding. Nader gained access to traffic accident statistics and was invited to congressional hearings on automobile safety by Senator Robert Kennedy. There, not only the Corvair but also models from other companies were criticized. However, Nader drew his own conclusion. General Motors' weak spot was safety. Not being a car expert, Nader compiled the information he had gathered into a book called Deadly at Any Speed, with the Corvair as its main target. The book was published in 1965, when 237,000 cars of this model had already been sold. No special advertising was needed, and Corvair owners flooded the corporation with letters of complaint. In response, General Motors decided to discredit Nader and hired detectives to expose his dishonesty. They tried to prove that Nader did not understand cars, that he was homosexual, and that he was anti-Semitic. None of these attempts to discredit him succeeded. Nader struck back, and as a result, the corporation paid him $425,000 in moral damages. The already improved Corvair ceased to be sold in 1966. 103,000 cars were sold in 1967 and only 27,000 in 1969, after which the model was discontinued. Misfortunes continued to haunt General Motors. In 1971, the company was forced to recall 6,700,000 cars produced between 1965 and 1969 for repair of a defective engine mount. Was the ill-fated Corvair fatal? Supporters of this model argued that it was necessary to reduce the weight of the car, as its cost and fuel consumption depended on it. Extra kilograms meant a drive shaft, frame, etc. In the 1960s, the only way to reduce the weight of the car was seen as a rear-mounted engine. The experience of using front-wheel drive in the US was miserable, although front-wheel drive Buick and Cadillac cars had appeared by the time the Corvair was discontinued. The Corvair lasted 10 years in production, and a station wagon and a sports version, the Corvair Monza, were produced. The latter was created by General Motors chief designer Bill Mitchell for his daughter. The car was presented at the Chicago Auto Show in February 1960 and was liked by David E. Davis, the director of an advertising agency that had a contract with General Motors for advertising and production. He insisted on the serial production of the Corvair Monza and organized a promotional run on several races around the Grand Canyon. The cars performed all those tricks that, according to Nader, threatened mortal danger without any problems. The reason for the Corvair's failure should be sought not in the car itself, but in the corruption of the corporation's top management. The winner in the story of the Corvair was one man, but everyone learned a lesson. In September 1966, the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act was adopted, which obliged automobile companies to comply with strict safety requirements for their products. General Motors, in particular, switched to front-wheel drive models earlier than its competitors from the Big Three. Competitors also drew conclusions. Ford engineers also tested the Corvair and noted its tendency to oversteer, but this did not prevent them from choosing the Corvair Monza as the prototype for their famous Mustang. However, the Ford Mustang already had a classic layout, the engine in the front, the driving wheels in the back. That's another story.